Hype man, Raj Nation, the GOAT to market. From Hype HQ in Chicago, Illinois, Startup Hype Man presents the GOAT to Market Show. What's up, everyone? I am your host, Raj Nation, the founder and chief pitch artist of Startup Hype Man. This podcast is where we bring you founders, company leaders, and creatives who are building it, who are doing it, who have been there and done that. And they pull back the curtain on their go-to-market strategies so that you can build a venture that you love and become the GOAT of your industry. Want first listen on episodes before anyone else? Subscribe to our newsletter at startuphypeman.com. You will get alerts every Sunday morning when we release new episodes. All right, let's hear how today's guest is becoming the GOAT. Ladies and gentlemen, making his way to the microphone from Miami, Florida, and currently residing in Jacksonville, Florida. He is the founder, the CEO of Be The Stage. Please welcome Pablo Gonzalez.
Let's go. I've been dying for this intro forever. What's up, Raj?
He is Pablo Gonzalez, like I mentioned, with Be The Stage. What is Be The Stage? Well, they are on a mission to prove that community creation is the future of business development. And they've got a whole strategy and playbook around that involves content creation, content repurposing, and building relationship flywheels. Pablo and his company at Be The Stage have been the team behind an additional $40 million revenue channel created on behalf of one of their clients, specifically by using a community play. Pablo's also been written about in the book, The Ultimate Sales Machine and Belonging to the Brand. Pablo knows a lot about how to get your message out there in a way that builds community. And you might remember Pablo from season 2 of the GTM show, where he was interviewing me about the creation of the GOAT to Market album, where we called that season Making the GOAT. As those of you who listened to that would remember, Pablo was the creative director on that album. So him and I have a long well, not long in terms of time, but I feel like short amount of time, but a deep relationship that we have. We're on a text message basis, so it's one of those things. Anyways, Pablo is here, and I wanted to bring him on the show finally as a formal guest because I think a lot of the stuff, Pablo, you've been doing recently around this idea of community and activation and creating like almost these like word of mouth machines will be really valuable for the GTM show audience. So today's episode, we are focused on specifically talking about how to make a community actually work. So once again, welcome to the show. Why is this on your mind? Why is this important to you?
Man, it's been my mission for like 9 years. Raj, I don't know if we ever got into it, man, but my big insight into community came at my brother's funeral 9 years ago, when 1,200 people showed up to it. And I looked around and, we were in this big Catholic church that I had different relationships with throughout my life. And when I realized that these 1,200 people represented one of the most valuable assets I could possibly have in my life, and I could never leave that community for whatever reason, man. They say that in moments of great pain come great clarity. It hit me that solved for churn, and it was a business outcome. And for a guy who has always been talented enough and had the personality to sell, but never really wanted to be a salesperson, the idea of proving that there is a way to create community and drive business development results became my mission from that moment on. And I've just been chasing it ever since. So that's why it's on my mind.
Can you say more? What did you mean by it solved for churn?
I mean that I grew up a really devout Catholic, and from the, in my teenage years, I started really doubting that stuff. And then, and ever since then, I kind of like fell in and out of what that meant to me. But at that exact moment, I knew that the Catholic Church was always going to be a part of my life because of that community.
All right. Very interesting. We'll perhaps dive a little bit more into that as we get into the whole community conversation. But before we go there, let's learn a little bit more about your background, which you've already started to share, at least to some extent. So you mentioned, your older brother passed away 9 years ago. Talk to me about growing up, the relationship dynamic you two had,
Yeah.
and how do you feel that's actually helped shape or maybe not shape how you build relationships
Oh,
now?
immensely. Yeah. So just generally, right? Like my family and I moved around a bunch when I was a kid, right? I'm the youngest person. I'm the youngest of three. I'm the most American person in my family and like my extended family. And what
Just
that
like hot
meant
dogs all
was,
day, apple pie.
wrestling and baseball cards is the way I put it.
Yeah.
But so, that what that means to me is that while I've always had this very personable um outlook on life and an ability to connect with people, nothing has been more important to me than the ability to belong quickly and to make people around me feel like they belong. I've always just been very acutely aware of that because I've always been like an insider outsider, no matter where I am at. And that is why my core skill set of this like community creation thing I think is there. As far as my relationship dynamic with my brother, bro, it's a much more personal thing. But like having a brother that's 8 years older than you, and being a super competitive youngest entitled child made me somebody that kind of like used him as like an anti North Star, right? Like I'd be like, whatever he'd be doing that wasn't good, I'd be like, well, that's not what I want to do. And it wasn't until he passed where, all these people showed up to his funeral, and a bunch of people reached out to me for years after, man. And everybody that reached out to me to a T said some variation of the reason why your brother meant so much to me is that whenever I was walking into a room and I knew he was there, I knew that I would feel like I would belong. And, this was this like really eye-opening moment for me of how little credit I gave him for the thing that I most admire, while giving him a bunch of credit for stuff that I didn't want to be like. And that also shifted my perception to how much more valuable are people around you than you give them credit for, no matter how close you are to them, even if they're the best man at your wedding, like my brother was, kind of thing, right? Like, so ever since that moment, I've just really leaned into the value of the other, from that standpoint. And I've been able to, while I always had that natural disposition to want to befriend and connect, the idea of I can learn from everybody in some way, and I can make sure that the people around me feel that they feel that value and are able to share that, has been the thing that I've really leaned into since that happened, and that's really shaped my career and kind of like my trajectory.
I think in a way, it's how we met in the first place, in person anyway. So if if I recall, I think the reason we originally connected online was I think you saw the Eminem Stan parody video, Carl,
Yeah.
that I did, the sales parody video
Yeah.
a few years ago. And so I think you just reached out because you're like, hey, that was really cool.
Yeah.
And probably a few months later, you reached out and were like, I'm going to be in Chicago for this event, but I'm getting a small group of people together for tea at the Drake, on this day. Would love for you to be one of them. And that's like a pretty cool offer, for someone who you're meeting for the first time. So I was like, hell yeah, I'll go to that. And I didn't even expect you to pick up the bill, but I think you did.
Yeah.
So that was, even more generous. But I think that's probably a great example of that ability to like make people feel welcome, be able to create instant connections. And I don't think the average person is thinking about relationship building in that way, even, right? Like I feel like, I'll put it to you this way. I think most people, if they were going to be in town for an event, they would either just do the event, or they would maybe try to set up some sales meetings, or even if they're going to set up networking meetings, they would say, I can meet you for coffee one-on-one in this 30, 45-minute window here, but then I have to go to this other meeting. And they would stack up a handful of one-on-one meetings. You went with why didn't I just get everyone in the same room? And all of a sudden, now, I don't want to misuse the word co-creating because it's not so much that. It's just that like relationships are forming, conversations are happening, and it's happening because you're the center point. But at the same time, you don't have to be the driver of every single conversation. You can kind of like sit back and just like let it play out.
That's a really astute observation, man. And I'm glad we're talking about that moment Because yeah, you're right. Most people are not as obsessive about relationship building as I am. And maybe co-creating, co-creating has something about it, but this idea that you can outsource the value of like what's happening in the room to it not having to be directly you, and therefore that creates extra value for people involved, right? Like you and I didn't get to know each other as much as I would have liked to if we would have had like lunch together.
Mm-hmm.
But it did create that bridge to, oh, that Pablo guy is somebody that like when he DMs me and whatever, I want to like talk to him and be receptive to his ideas and whatever, right? So like
Yep.
I'm pretty sure if I hadn't done that, you and I would not have created the go-to-market album together.
Yeah, no chance. Zero chance that would have happened.
Yeah.
And I wouldn't have known who you were. I wouldn't have known anything about
Yeah.
your take on music, your flavor, your perspective, any type of value. I wouldn't consider you as someone who could be valuable to create a hip hop album with.
Yeah. Even though when I did reach out to you, my reach out to you was like, yo, I love the Stan thing. I'm convinced that somebody's going to be the Weird Al of LinkedIn.
Yes, I remember that.
And
yeah.
I want to be the person that helps that person.
I guess, yeah, you did call your shot in that respect. But I mean, I'm going to be honest. When you said that, I was like, yeah, sure. Like, we'll see. All right, guy.
Yeah.
So it did take like the sort of the more intentional collision, if you will. And yeah, we talked a little bit that day, but not a ton, but enough that it built a certain level of trust. And I think that was what was important. Like it was, and not that I was even at that point, like, oh, you're the guy I'm going to make an album with. It was, I know enough about this person to feel like I could reach out to him about this creative idea I have, at least to just get his take on it.
Yeah. Yeah. 100%. That's it right there. It's just like the bridge of this is an attractive character that belongs somewhere in my life. And when that idea pops up, it's going to fit in like a puzzle piece as opposed to like ping off of the, like the atmosphere or whatever.
Mm. One of the things you mentioned before was you used the phrase, I've always been the insider outsider. And I don't know if a lot of people are familiar with that concept. Can you explain that more?
I don't know if that is a concept to be honest, but like as I've gotten older, man, I used to think I was the only one. I used to think I was the only person that is perfectly meshed into two different cultures. And, when I'm not in Miami, it's people are like, your name is Pablo, but you don't look Mexican. And like, and then, and Hispanic people feel the same way about me, that I'm like way more American than they thought. And American people think I'm way more Hispanic than they thought. Even though they think I'm one of them, so that's just always been very present to me, man. Even growing up in Miami, I was the only Venezuelan out of all like my sons of Cuban friends, even though now there's a ton of Venezuelans in Miami, right? So like that was something I used to only share with my sister and my brother. And I now realize that I was just kind of like ahead of the trend of what America has become, right? We are a nation of a lot of immigrants, and we are, and like I think the violent difference between generations that's gotten even more exaggerated creates this feeling more for people that like get along with their elders, but also feel fiercely connected to theirs, right? Like the idea that we're sold this perfect sense of belonging where we should be and we should have friends that we've had forever, and that's just where we belong, versus the idea that you can belong anywhere, but there isn't 100% of you anywhere there. I don't know, man. I've never really tried to articulate it, but for me, it really was this idea that I was like too Hispanic for American people in my own eyes, and too American for Hispanic people in my own eyes, and too Venezuelan for Cuban people in Miami. So, I just kind of always felt that, but I was always on the inside. I just never had my own exact clique, but I could fit into all of them.
Yeah. I think I'm very similar in that respect. So the phrase I would have put on it is like dual identity. I visit my relatives in India growing up, and I'm like the American visiting them. But then in America, I'm the Indian.
Yeah.
You step out of your front door, you're part of the existing culture that's there. You step back into your front door, you're part of like the real culture you came from. And I mean, having perspective on it now, I do think it really does help in relation. It creates a different level of empathy and understanding for people that I don't know if that can be trained or taught.
That's exactly. I would also add the word perspective, right? Like I think people that people that understand how life is outside of the US have a little extra perspective of the
Mm.
fact that, it's not all about delivery food and Walmart all the time. And like, you can't demand conveniences, and you're pretty fortunate to have a certain baseline no matter what, even if you're living in the US kind of thing. Um, I think that adds to it, but empathy for sure. Seeing from the outside in has kind of been like the thing that really marks me, is this I've always sought to like look at the world from the eyes of the person I'm speaking to, as opposed to my own, because I felt like I didn't have my own view of the world that was like really, materialized.
So let's build on that and talk me through the journey of how you start Be the Stage, because I think you're a little bit different from the typical guest we would have on this show, in that you have more of a blue collar background, right? In like construction, real estate. Not that real estate is blue collar, but more construction, right? And I think at one point you were probably even like operating machinery, I think.
For a small period.
And then,
Yeah.
How does that turn into like essentially a career in content marketing?
Yeah. Yeah, man. It's funny. I was talking to somebody a couple of days ago, and I was like, yeah, 5 years ago, I was the director of sustainability for like a hospital builder. Like, so different, so different than this like startup world that you and I kind of overlap in. I started my career. It's funny that you say I have a blue collar background, because I've essentially always come from a very like enabled private school background. But I graduated college in like the early 2000s, and the world was under construction. And my first job was this like manager and training program to get to like division management level, um, for a roll up that was rolling up subcontractors that were catering to the track home industry, because that stuff was booming, right? And out there, I became they started me up. It was a Fortune 500 company. Started me in Miami, moved me to California. Became division manager of Orange County at 25. I was running like a $15 million P&L with like 120 employees. Out there, I got really into green building. Came back to Miami 2009, started a green building consulting company. It was the first business that I ever started. And 2 years later, I got acquired. Well, I got acquired. I got sucked up by my biggest client, and they gave me like an in-house job as a director of sustainability inside this like hospital builder. But what happened when I came back to Miami was I decided to like say yes to things anew and see my hometown in a different light. And one of the things I said yes to was starting a young professionals group for Habitat for Humanity, a charity down there in Miami, international charity most people have heard of probably. But that sent me down a whole different path of a different professional formation, where we started these young professional groups by the value prop was like, you'd meet somebody, be like, hey man, Miami's a flaky city. If you come to one of our events, you're going to meet people that care at least a little bit more about something else than just themselves. And our meetings every month are at the boardroom of somebody that's in the board of directors, who's an influential person in town. You get to meet them. They tell you about their career. And then we plan a happy hour or a volunteer event or a fundraiser or whatever we're doing. And we replicated that model across like 4 different charities. I got on the board of 4 charities, got into like, top 20 under 40 kind of like lists. And what I realized at one point was that I could use that same exact model of leveraging a small group of people that were interesting to get me to be the broker between a really influential person and them, via a micro event. First was for like recruiting for this like young professionals thing. Then we started doing events like that, like going beyond the board members and like the board members' friends for like things happening in Miami, to eventually I started using that for business development. And I'd be like, oh, this developer is building a high rise that's transit-oriented development. I would approach him and say, hey, a politician on the board of one of my charities really cares about like public transportation. Let's have a event about transit-oriented development. I'm going to invite these like young professional groups that I care about in Miami. And they'd say yes, they'd show up. A couple of weeks later, we're backdooring a $60 million project that we had no shot at, 6 months prior. And that turned me into a business developer. And once I paired that insight with what happened, at my brother's funeral, I was like, okay, there's a formula here of community creation for business development. And I just basically didn't shut up about it, trying to like find a way to prove that thesis in a place that wasn't my hometown, that didn't take me 8 years to create, even with like an inherent advantage.
Yeah.
And I got that opportunity here in Jacksonville at this like startup that was a software for Amazon sellers, where this guy was pivoting, going more B2B. He's like, I need a biz dev like guy like you. Offered me some equity and a 1 year contract to come up here. And I essentially was so excited to get out of construction and go test this thing that I jumped into a burning ship. The software wasn't really working, right? Like this, like new launch wasn't close to ready. The developer quit the week that I quit my job. There was like a rip-off report on the founder, like the first month there, like everything was going wrong. We were churning people like crazy. And I'm here as like the new VP of business development. So when I went from this idea of having like live events in different cities for Amazon sellers to let's do some Zoom events in 2018, right? And
You were ahead of the Zoom curve.
I was ahead of the Zoom curve. And what I saw was that our 12 highest paying clients made up 30% of our recurring revenue. And I was not going to lose those people, right? So every 2 weeks, we were just showing up and we'd have some value based on what we're seeing in the ecosystem, something the software was telling us, something we're learning from talking to people. I just read Never Split the Difference. Here's what I learned about negotiation, and then host like a powwow of people complaining about how like Jeff Bezos hates them and why are they shutting down their store. And what ended up happening is like they immediately all like became best friends. Right. Like the Serbian guy that trusted me the least to start the thing, a month later was like on a call being like, I feel like my whole life I've been eagle flying alone on top of mountain. And now I feel like I'm eagle with other eagles and you are my best friend. So I'm like, holy shit, are we recording this? Right. Like, so we started recording the calls. We hosted a live event and using these like bits of like, oh my God, my company is failing. And then somebody giving them advice and us saying, are you suffering from this problem? We're more than just a software company. We're a community. And a month later, we'd have the same person be like, oh dude, you saved my life. Thank you so much. We hosted a small event with these 12 folks down in Panama. I took them salsa dancing. I gave them like a template to like present their business. And from that template, we realized that they're each really good at one thing. So we created a course based on the one thing we learned off of each person that we sold as a big like fundraising mechanism for the software. That was the big like first success that we had beyond this idea of like this like marketing content working really well because it was such genuine, like facing the camera, you saved my life stuff. And 6 months later, we hosted an event, put them on stage, and voila, like we solved the whole like customer churn journey problem. And after that year, I was like, cool, I proved my thesis. I feel like I got hoodwinked into joining this company. So I'm just going to go off and build my own thing. And early 2019, I just kind of like decided I was going to build a business chasing this North Star. And by the end of 2019, this company, JWB, that's a $120 million at the time real estate company, hired me. And year one, we built this like $40 million revenue channel off the back of a community. And now I'm written about in books. And here I am doing this thing for a living, man. That's essentially the arc.
Pretty good arc.
Yeah, it's been fun.
The name Be the Stage is not just a name because if you actually sit with those three words, it has meaning. Can you share the philosophy behind the name?
Yeah. To me, it's more valuable to be the stage than to try to be the star on the stage. Said another way, I'd rather be seen as a kingmaker than to be seen as somebody that wants to be king. Because everybody that wants to be king is going to want to be your friend if you're the kingmaker, right? Whereas like if you're like showing up trying to be the king, everybody wants to compete for the throne. So to me, it came from another insight during that time. After I went in as director of sustainability for this construction company, it got bought out by an international conglomerate. My title was kind of like all of a sudden like, what do you do? So I was looking to become more valuable. The CEO had turned over a couple of times. He got invited to speak at a panel for smart cities in front of the Economic Development Agency of Miami. Last minute decides he doesn't want to go, sends me in his stead. I get there and I share the stage with like the head of Cisco Systems for Latin America and the head of the Smart Cities Initiative for the World Bank, and me, who's like early 30s, thinking I'm about to get fired because I provide no value for my company. And when I get off of the stage, there's like a line of 7 people deep waiting to talk to me, and everybody's like either a vendor trying to sell to my company that thinks I have some kind of like authoritative power, another developer that's like, hey, what's it take to hire a guy like you, or like my buddy Will Beckham that I met that day that was like a young man looking for mentorship. And what I realized was that the brain justifies what it sees, right? So if you are in an audience and you see someone on stage, you automatically attribute value to that person because they're there and you're here. And my head immediately went to, oh, I can do this trick. I can provide the stage for others and provide value for them in this way, in a way to then show up as a valuable person in their life and close deals with them, which is what led me to starting to host events with developers and stuff like that. So be the stage is this philosophy of like, if you can become the stage where people get known, then you get to control the conversation around the problem you're solving.
And I mean, coming back to how we first met in person, sounds like that was on a small scale, that was an example of creating a stage, right? You brought, I don't know, a dozen people, maybe a few less than that around for tea. You created the opportunity for people to meet and talk and get their ideas out without having to be the guy who had to control everything.
That's it. You figured me out, bro. I think that way for everything, right? Like, I don't know if you've ever gotten an intro from me, but like when I intro to people, I literally think of it as 2 stages. Like, how can I say like, you know, Raj meet Nate, Nate meet Raj. Nate is, you know, I've met him because of this. He's awesome because of that. I have no doubt that he can do this for you. Nate, Raj is like the hype man. I met him because he made this like bomb thing. I have no doubt he can do this for you. Happy connecting, right? Like I think of like, how do I put 2 people on a pedestal next to each other so that one person says, oh man, this guy sounds really interesting. And oh man, Pablo's making me look really good. And they both become attractive characters to each other.
Yeah. It's this concept of platforming others.
Yeah.
So we've used the word community several times thus far, and I don't know if we've narrowly defined it. And I think the average person, if they look at, you know, let's take a tech company and says, oh, community, it's like they're referring to their Slack group. They're referring to their mighty network. I mean, you know, we have Go-to-Market Club that is, and it's an attempt at community. But I have a feeling you're going to say, well, a Slack channel, a mighty network on its own, a WhatsApp group on its own is not community.
Correct. I would consider that the watering hole, not the community itself, right? Like when you think about business outcomes that can happen from community, there's a couple. I am concerned with business development outcomes, right? So like my definition of what creates that is a purposeful interaction between the company, super consumers, and prospects, right? So like if you can get people that are all in on you, having a conversation about you with people that are deciding whether to be in on you or not, that to me is client acquisition through word of mouth, right? So the community to me is the fact that is happening. It's those like interconnected relationships that provide the social proof. And kind of like you described my like tea party, right? Like it just adds scale to like your reputation and your influence and whatnot when you can outsource that social proof and that value creation to people close enough to you that the others that are, you know, a one standard deviation away speed up the trust, right? So like, I don't know if I answered your question. To me, the community is a group of people with a shared purpose that also share connections and share value with each other, right? And like where it happens, that could be the mighty network or the Slack channel or a Zoom chat or your once a year conference, right? Like, or your summer camp, whatever you want to call that, right? Or your church, you know, like that's where it happens.
So that I think that's really interesting because I think we really do tend to associate the idea of community, not just with the platform like Slack or whatever it is, but almost more than that, like this idea that there needs to be interactions all the time that are happening. Like it's not a community unless people are talking every single day or every few days. And you're over here being like, well, what if you had a once a year conference? That's actually a community. Now, most people would be like, no, that's an event. So give me the counter argument that that is a community and not just an event.
Are people keeping up with each other throughout the year and then reuniting at this event? If you are like refreshing it every single year, not a community, it's an event. But if you are driving interconnections from people and like events where they, it doesn't have to be events, it's just any kind of opportunity where they get to like share value with each other beyond it just being top down from you. That to me is a community.
Okay. So I think a lot of brands, particularly in startup world, want community. Many say they have community. It's arguable if they have it or not. But at the same time, I think there's also a pretty decent struggle to actually not just create, but embrace, oh, we should do a community play. Because it just seems like it takes forever for it to like, you've talked before about like the flywheel effect. It seems like it takes forever for the flywheel to actually take effect. So how do you approach community then, knowing that it's a long-term play? And some of these companies, especially if they're early on, they may not have a whole lot of time.
Yeah. This was a big aha moment for me early in 2019 with my my coach, my buddy Jerry McNamara. When I was out there, when I was out there set on like selling community, he's just like, hey man, you need to solve a Monday morning problem or else no one's going to buy from you. Right. Like, and at the end of the day, nobody gets the Sunday night scaries because their boss expects a community tomorrow, but they get the Sunday night scaries for a lot of other things. Right. So for me, the ability to sell this stuff and to get people to succeed with it lies in figuring out ways to get short-term wins on the way to community as a way to build a community. I don't know if you want me to expand on that from there, or do you want to like,
go
or
for
was
it.
that what
Go
you
for
asked
it.
me?
No, go for
Yeah.
it.
So examples of that is, in early 2019, early 2020, man, everybody wanted content, and really quantity of content was valuable, right? So being able to co-create content with people via a podcast, via a webinar series, and these kinds of things was an inherently valuable thing for people. And that's how I got in the door with JWB. Because at the end of the day, they just wanted a way to sell properties to people that had never met them before, that didn't come from like a real estate education program that they were already paying giant referral fees to, right? So we created this like online talk show that we went live twice a week with. And because we did a couple of things around this idea of making it obvious that we were trying to empower people, highlight other people in our ecosystem, get them to succeed beyond just like buying properties with these guys and investing with these guys, people kept showing up. We had a shared identity that we created. People kept showing up. And the first couple signs was, man, people we're bringing on the show are doing business with us. This is great. Right. Like, so that idea makes a lot of sense. Right. I think other really great ideas is how can you productize the thing that you are co-creating? For example, what you're doing with Active Campaign, this idea of co-creating an online course that you can teach people through a cohort to go through a journey, to use the same tool together, and also create this environment where they support each other, I believe is going to drive a major sense of community with these folks that are inside of your go-to-market community. That's going to create this like ongoing sense of belonging, because now they all like each other, they've all supported each other, and they're going to communicate through you because you're the one that brought them together while using this tool that you have just taught them how to use, right? So like that idea, whether
let me just for everyone who's not familiar with what you're talking about. So at least as of this recording, we just recently announced and officially selected the first cohort, and perhaps only, I don't know, we don't know if we'll do it again, but We decided to, in my partnership with Active Campaign, I decided, why don't we run an accelerator teaching people how to build an effective newsletter? Because I know that's something that people want and a lot of people don't have, or they have a newsletter, but they don't love it, or it's not very effective for them. So, we got together and said, all right, let's launch. It's going to be called the Newsletter Growth Accelerator. It's going to be a pretty relatively quick program. It's like, it's 5 sessions that happen over 3 or 4 weeks. And we're going to get people to launch or relaunch a newsletter designed to be a pipeline driving engine. And it's a free program. The caveat, I don't even think it's that much of a caveat. Just the only term is really, you have to use Active Campaign during the program, because that's what we're going to be teaching off of. And I don't want to sit here and have to figure out how do you modify, when we get to the part about like structure, I don't want to figure out how to use HubSpot or whatever else, or Zoho or MailChimp or whatever. So if we're going to give all this value for free, might as well use the tool that we want you using also. And we'll give the tool to you for free during it. And if you want to keep using it afterwards, then you just have to, you have to pay the normal cost for it. So like you said, like it is a, like, it's funny because like when I came up with that idea and brought it to Active Campaign, I did not at all think about it through the lens of, oh, this is community building. But as you talk about it now back to me, I'm like, okay, maybe it is, because it's not just going to be these lessons that are taught by myself and Casey from Active Campaign, like where it's like teaching. I mean, even if it is just that, there's still Q&A, and there's still someone who's going to be like, oh, I like the question that so-and-so just asked. I should ping them about that thing because I'm thinking about that too.
Yep.
And so even if it was just that, that's probably enough. But this is also going to be like, we have in the time in between each session, they're going to be inside our GTM club channel, and there'll be, intentional interactions there. So, I mean, as I think about the strategy for this, like I'm really keen to teach people about like newsletters, but at the same time, I think this could be a really, really strong play for Active Campaign that no other, software like that is doing. They're not doing accelerators, especially for free, teaching you how to derive value from a channel you might need. It just so happens to use their product. And by the way, for anyone listening, we've already closed off the cohort. If we do it again, you can subscribe to our newsletter so you know that we're doing it.
Giant waiting list, I'm sure.
But in the meantime, if you do want to check out Active Campaign on your own, go ahead to the show notes. There's a free 2-week trial link for Active Campaign. But with that structure, I think so.
So let me pause you right there, Raj. That is within a standard deviation difference of my Tea Party thing, right? Like outsourcing value, right? Like, but you tied it to something that could be a business outcome for you, a growing relationship with Active Campaign, a business outcome for Active Campaign. Hey, if these people really figure it out, they're going to continue to use the product. And if you think about it from a community lens, now you can be driving that conversation to make sure that you're not sucking up as much air as you thought you were going to have to suck up. And it's actually better for you because you can like really put people on a pedestal to be like, oh, dude, you did that great. You teach this thing right now for other people. You're giving them value. You're being the stage for them.
Yeah.
And that drives connection, right? So like the big thing that we realize that I've seen over and over again in our framework for community is that it starts with like one evangelist that really cares about solving a problem. Then it's going to grow to like an inner circle of like 8 to 12 kind of like other evangelists that believe the same things and are kind of like in there and have been validated by that person. And from there, that's when it can go beyond just the manual go-to thing, right? Like the manual you having to do all the work, like you probably had to do in the GTM club, for like, I don't know if it's still, like for like the beginning, like 6 months or whatever.
Yeah.
But if you can shortcut to those like 8 to 12 evangelists to start, and a cohort class is a really good way of doing that, or a like virtual event where you like platform people, or a podcast where you're doing it intentionally to then drive it back to like a conversation, or a live event where you're having them be your speakers and now everybody sees them as the attractive character. If you do that intentionally, now you shortcut that idea of like having the people that have the buy-in that are also going to rep the community because they see an inherent value within the community of being a part of it, and outside the community because it makes them feel special outside the community as well. And that is the driver, right? So it's really all about creating those experiences and creating those moments where you can platform these people that then become attractive characters with a stake inside the community that are going to continue it going. And you're no longer Superman, you're now the Avengers.
You know, the other thing that I didn't realize until I saw the applications that came in is I was like, oh, wow. You know, a quarter of these people are leads I've talked to over the last 1 to 2 years who didn't buy.
Yeah.
Another good chunk of these people are brand new people I've never talked to, but fit directly within my target audience.
Yep.
And as I look at that, I'm like, huh, I'm going to be in front of them sharing expertise for a few weeks in a row. It's connected enough to the core offering I have around pitch development.
Yep.
Maybe this is actually even a BD play on my side too, that I was not even, I didn't even realize was going to end up happening.
Honestly, I'm shocked that you didn't realize that that's happening, but yeah, for sure. If you want to take that to another level, one of the reasons why I'm really butthurt that I can't be in this cohort just because of timing reasons is because I've realized that if I join somebody's like cohort class that I have a relationship with and they see value in me inherently, and I'm like a superstar in the class that shines and like helps people, it also becomes BD for me. Right. So like the author of The Ultimate Sales Machine, Amanda, she hosted this like Dream 100 cohort workshop. I showed up there and I was just like Mr. Superstar student in there. And she was always like, oh yeah, Pablo, who built a $40 million community off a podcast and blah, 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 because she knows me well. That filled up my pipeline from her cohort class as well. So, right. Like if you start, the mindset shift is like taking this idea that you think the attention vector only goes one way from like star on the stage to audience, and figuring out how you can create the different attention vectors between the people there. And then go as far as sprinkling in content that then allows it to scale. That's the mindset shift, right? And if you can create these events, I call it experiential content marketing, right? It's figuring out these like moments in time that you are getting people that already are in on you, and people that you want in on you, and people that are thinking about being in on you, all in one place to like you show a little bit of value, let other people show a little bit of value, create a little bit of content around the people there, not just myself and the event itself. And that makes others want to show up because they see the value in the room, and they see people in the room that show value get to like shine outside of that room as well.
So, okay, a phrase you use, experiential content marketing. Everything we've talked about, I just want to make sure I understand this correctly. Everything we've talked about so far, are you saying it falls under like, these are all examples of experiential, like community building is really experiential content marketing? Is that the relationship that we should be creating?
I think community building can be done a lot of ways. I think if you want to have short-term wins as you are building community, experiential content marketing is the way you got to do it.
Okay. So, earlier we were talking about the idea of the long-term win and the short-term win. Mm-hmm. In this play, like, come back to like, what is an example of a short-term win? But not just what is the example, but like, how do we actually measure this stuff? Is it effective, or is it just a waste of time?
Yeah, man, I'm in on this. At the end of the day, what you aim to create through a community as far as revenue goes is more revenue from less leads, right? Like less people that are having to interact with your operation and creating operational burden within it, turning into more revenue, right? And we saw that. This is what we see as time goes on with our clients, with JWB, it happened in 1 year because it was 2020 and we were there at the right time where like it all shifted, right? And we completely flipped their funnel. But the first thing that you need to be thinking about is, all right, you're creating experiential content marketing experiences, right? So like, is the content that you are creating from it something that's going to help you accelerate your pipeline that is already there, right? So like are you getting social proof about what you're doing that you can then serve up to somebody that's already thinking about you, whether they were there or not? Are you creating other insights of like how this, the why, what, how of like how your product helps people? Like you should be doing the why on your own, but the what and the how can really come from these experiential content marketing plays, coming from somebody that's not you, right? So like if somebody like you is just like, oh yeah, I use this product because it solved my problem like this and I used it this way, and that describes exactly where you're coming from, or they look like you, or they have a similar company than you, you're going to trust that way more than me being like, oh yeah, we do a million things for companies just like you, right? Like if you see somebody saying it, that's it right there, right? So like to me, the short-term win is like, are we getting that content? And are we now using that content in order to like drive pipeline in a meaningful way? The way that I measure this overall is you have these events that you are designing. You have to understand your sales cycle and give yourself a time frame from the event that is within the sales cycle. With JWB, it takes about 22 days to put a property under contract, right? So we measure how many people have closed on a property within 30 days of having attended one of these events, which is which is a webinar, but is branded as a talk show, but it's a community play because the same people come all the time. And there's like a whole like country club happening in the Zoom chat. Not unsimilar to like what Chris Walker was doing with Demand Gen Live back in the day. Right. So,
explain that. I don't know if everyone's familiar with that. And actually, I'm not even familiar with it. So.
Yeah, man. So Chris Walker built Refine Labs, which has been like the darling of like the marketing world on LinkedIn, off the back of a very similar thing. He was doing once a week Demand Gen Live, where he would show up, he would let people come on to like share their insights in marketing and answer questions and deliver on like education for people trying to become better marketers. At the same time, he was publishing that on his podcast. He was publishing that stuff on LinkedIn. So it was making him look smart, answering questions, and expressing his viewpoint of how you generate demand in the event marketing world, not an event, in the demand generation world that he knew was getting shared left and right by people like, oh, dude, this guy said something really smart, and that was leading to revenue for him. So similar to what we did, but yeah, continue. What were you gonna say?
I just wanted to make sure we knew what Refine Labs and what Chris Walker was doing with his event. So
yeah, man. So I think he built like a $20 million kind of like marketing agency in like 3 years based on like the back of like doing this thing at a higher level than me, because he's actually a marketer. I'm a construction guy that just figured this out 5 years ago. Right.
Okay. So, come back to your JWB example. So you're looking at like time to revenue from an event.
Yeah.
What are the other leading metrics?
Yeah. So time to revenue at a specific distance that you create from an event, like from the people that showed up to these events, right? Yeah. And by the way, we're not getting hung up on like first touch, last touch, middle touch attribution. If somebody came to one of these within 30 days of closing on their property, like it influenced it, right? Like they showed up, they saw that a bunch of other people believe in it. It definitely helps, right? Then we also measure the results between the people that have shown up to this ever versus people that have never shown up to any of these events, and the difference between that. And what we see is there's a higher average initial contract and there's a faster speed to sale, right? Like there's a faster, there's less time in pipeline, right?
Yeah.
So,
I find that with the pitch workshops that I do.
Correct.
The leads that get generated out of that, the time to close it's honestly, a one call close is not unexpected. However, if it's a cold inbound lead or a cold outbound lead, I already know in advance I don't need to be trying to close this.
Yeah,
I'm playing for 2 call, maybe 3 calls,
totally different
before we get to that close.
Yeah. Yeah, totally different. And I don't know if you have this data or if this has ever been a data point for you, but like, I don't know if you've ever had anybody that you've had a call with that you're like, oh, by the way, I'm doing a workshop. You should show up. Like, I feel like those people, they cook real quick, bro. That's like the sales microwave, right?
Yeah. When the timing aligns well enough, yeah, definitely. I say, hey, come to this thing. And I'll even be like, by the way, if you come to that, there's a discount built into then
For sure.
working with me.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. Right.
So
Because
there's
it's
even an
it's
incentive.
less of a headache. It's a better client for you.
Yes, exactly.
So, and then we also look at overall non-direct attribution revenue close, right? Like year
Okay.
one for this company, they had 1,200 leads coming in from the website and they closed 21 deals Q1. By Q4, there was like 700 leads coming in from the website because they had just gotten featured on the front page of the Wall Street Journal. Q4, they had like 700 leads from the website and 68 deals closed coming in off the website, right? So like you also attribute that, right? So it's like activity that happens within a certain time frame from an event from the people that attended the event, difference between people that have attended events versus not attended events, and then non-attributable revenue and increase in what I call digital word of mouth, right? Like this idea of like people are coming in, they're just more convinced of who you are and you're having a better job doing that versus like a completely cold lead.
I've got a few more questions that I want to ask about this. But before we go there, the all of the things we're talking about here around experiential content marketing, they got to funnel back to like a core product ultimately, unless you're just, an affluent or just a very benevolent community builder for the sake of building community. So for everyone listening, if the product you are driving people back to is software, then you obviously want the experience with the software to live up to the experience they got with the piece of content or the community. And that is where you got to make sure that your software stands up, especially as you start to get more and more customers. And you want to make sure whoever you're using, if you're not doing it in house, that whatever partner you're using is someone who can build stand-up software that stands up as you get more users. And that's the people who you need to know are Akeva. And to me, they are the GOAT of software development. And I say that because I have seen too many startups get screwed over by offshore or budget development shops. And those providers, what they are order takers who do the bare minimum. And that often means you end up with software that has gaping holes in it on the back end, or you have to pay, you get forced to pay hidden, what are called release fees to just claim ownership of your code if you ever want to take it away from that company at any point. And that's not what you don't want to be in that situation. And because separate from that is Akeva, and they actually build strategically for scale from day one. They help you make product decisions. They don't just take a list of things you say and they do it. They look through the specifications and they say, what's the optimal way to build this? And on top of that, they give you full ownership of your code. And all of that is by default. You're not like paying anything extra. There's no additional plan you got to buy just to have ownership of your code. You own it. They build it, but you own it. And they've got a really good offer for you. It's a You Call It code review. That is, if you remember, back in college, maybe there was like Wednesday nights was like $1 You Call It's, where it would be like, like you can call like whatever, be a $5 or $1 shot, you call whatever it is, as long as it was like well liquor. Now this is a premium You Call It. So You Call It code review. Hit up Akeva. As long as you qualify, they will review the most critical parts of your code so you can see exactly what you would need to launch or scale. And they will do this completely free. And then here's where the You Call It comes in. You call it from there. So if you want to handle things on your own, you call it. If you want Akeva's help to develop or build out, you call it. If you want to take it somewhere else to a different provider, you even call that. So I'm saying it's a crazy good offer. No one else is doing anything near this. So if you're ready for that You Call It or code review, and if you're ready to get goated, see if you qualify for that review by heading to akeva.io and just filling out the inquiry form. That's Akeva, AKAVA.io, akeva.io. Fill out the inquiry form. Tell them Startup Hype Man sent you, and you'll be on your way to becoming the GOAT with your software. So let's assume
I can't hear Akeva without thinking about that line from Sincerely Yours. We're like, created like we Akeva.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, they're so good that they have been shouted out in a rap lyric on the Go to Market album. Shit, creating like we Akeva.
Yeah.
So let's say you have the stand-up product behind the stand-up front-end experience. So coming back to that front-end experience,
Yeah.
You talked about some of the metrics there that are
Raj, real
important to
quick,
look at.
because
Yeah.
it kind of dials into what you were talking about with like how Akeba helps people, man. But like I think you really gotta to have it tie in. This is why I'm such a fan of category design. Um, you want the experience of the event to be in line with the problem that you solve,
Mm.
right? So this idea, like you, it's going to be, that's why this active campaign thing that you're doing to me is particularly like so genius, because like you're using the tool to teach people how to like solve a problem with the tool, with a bunch of people that are trying to grow newsletters that could definitely use your idea on like messaging and whatnot, right? Like
Yeah.
that to me is perfectly seamless. It's got to be in line with that, right? Like so it just made me think of that when you started talking about like how Akeva helps people, because it really, like, you've got to be solving a problem for people with community. There is no community that will happen just because you're like, hey man, here's a gazebo, use it for community. Like it's got to be like, yo, here's a garage with tools and we're building surfboards, use it for community. You know what I mean? Like it's got to be that, right?
Unless your community is surfers, right?
Well, that's what I'm saying. Well, that's what I'm saying. Like you got to like give people
You've got
tools
to
and a
align.
mission.
Yeah, yeah. There has to
Yeah.
be a clear alignment. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's if this accelerator goes the way I expect it to with Active Campaign, I think this is a knockout idea that more brands should invest in. And you best believe I'm going to go to the other pieces of software that I use.
Yep.
And I can go to Calendly, which is a software that I dearly love.
Yeah.
But they're not paying me a dime. I'm paying them. And
Yeah.
I will go to them and I will say, why don't we run this program on sales development? But it's brought to you by Calendly, and everyone gets a free Calendly account for the duration of the program. And I'm going to show them how they can set up Calendly in a smart way to architect their sales process the way I do. And then we get some conversions from that. So
that makes me think that Calendly should have paid for my boot camp of how to like create like an online talk show, because I use Calendly and I use Calendly for all of these experiences, right? Like when we run like the podcast as a trade show booth experience, as an experiential content marketing play, we use Calendly to slot people in of like when you're showing up. So idea, bro, good call.
Yeah. Oh, interesting. Okay. Yeah. Now it's going to be a race to who reaches out to Calendly for it now.
Bring it up.
So, okay. Couple more quick questions here.
Mm-hmm.
You talked about those metrics that you want to look at, like what is the time to close from the point of the event? What's the average order value? Is it higher or is it on par or whatever? And you said you should expect those numbers. What happens if you're not getting those numbers? Does that mean scrap the entire thing, or is it a failure of the event? Is it a failure of the audience that was attracted? Like what do you do if you're like, we're doing all this stuff, but it's not pulling in the numbers we expected to?
Man, this kind of complex maneuver is like a living organism, right? So I think I think you're asking me to like diagnose you if you have like a cough and I'm a doctor kind of thing, right? But like there's a couple things you can look at. You can look at, are you getting the right people in the room? Like I'll start at the top, man. It all stems, like we talk about that relationship flywheel thing that I like to talk about. To me, it's value, connections, and content is the flywheel. But it all starts with value, right? Like if you are not putting out the right value for the people
is that the graphic that's behind you, by the way, in your
it is
here?
Yeah.
I can only see half of it.
Yeah. Well, I just have it behind me. But yeah, correct. Like I see it as the flywheel of like value, connections, and content, right? Like if you are spotlighting a specific value that you are to get from showing up to a thing, then you have the chance for people to show up, because people show up for value, right? Like what's in it for me is always part of that equation. Once you get them there, then it's like, how can you drive these different vectors of connection between host and guest of honor, between host and audience, between audience and guest of honor, between audience and audience, right? Like those are the connections you can drive. And then how can you create content from those different vectors of connection and those like aha moments that you can showcase to promote how valuable this event is for everybody involved, which then adds to the next value of the next event, right? So like I would always start at the value piece. And are you really are you really generating value for people that show up, and are you attracting them? Like, what's the bait, man? Like, like there's always like a little bit of bait of just like, you can get famous in this space if I'm doing a good job of repurposing the content of like people around it. There's the bait of like, you're going to learn something. There's the bait of you're going to meet this one person that you wish that you could meet before, but now I'm going to make that happen for you. And somewhere in the middle of that is like what you're doing wrong if it's not working for you.
Are the right people coming to that piece of content or that experience, I think, is really key. And I was building out some of the content for the newsletter Growth Accelerator, and one of the pieces I have in that when we talk about defining your audience is like making sure you know exactly who you're trying to connect with. And like the example I give is, let's say you have a piece of like sales technology. There is a difference between building an audience of a salesperson versus the sales leader who's the buyer of that technology. And it's really easy to conflate the two and create all this material that is just focused on like how to sell. And if your strategy is going bottom up, that's fine. But you have to understand up front who are you really going for here and what strategy do you want to play? Because I see that happen a lot where you can get trapped in like but we had all these people engaged, none of it converted. And it's like, but they're all in our demographic. And it's like, they're part of that ecosystem, but are they the people who you want to actually be getting in front of, or are they one step removed from who you want to be getting in front of?
Yeah. Who are you going for and what's valuable to that person?
Right.
Yeah.
So long-term, we've talked a lot about like the short-term wins along the way.
Yeah.
Long-term, I'm not so much concerned here about like the metrics.
Yeah.
I more so want to know like, what does the company look like, feel like, what's happening in that, paint that picture.
Yeah. Yeah. Long-term, you're a beloved brand in your space, right? Like long-term, you have the event that people go to every year. Long-term, you are you're the, to me, this is like scaling the whole being like the guy that knows a guy thing, right? Like long-term, you are the answer to more than just like your product. You are the person that you are like the center point of the conversation where people go to figure out how to level up in the thing that you're trying to do. Whether it's through like the events in your space, whether it's through opportunities to like have better partnerships and like people bringing in, but like long-term, it just becomes a very like inbound attention thing where people are bringing you opportunities as opposed to like you going out and having to chase all of that stuff, which metrics wise leads to lower CAC, higher LTV.
I want to, before we head to our wrap up, I want to hit on one question here to kind of summarize all of this. A brand, a company, product, insert whatever categorical identifier there, that is not thinking about or investing in experiential content marketing is what, versus a brand that is thinking about and investing in it is what?
Man, I think somebody not investing in driving community and driving word of mouth, right? Like I think experiential content marketing to me is just like the thing that I've realized that leads to like the fastest results while building the thing that you want long term. But if you've got a better framework, go for it, right? Like, and I want to know about it because this is my mission, right? But like, if you're not out there trying to create this like community flywheel, inbound word of mouth flywheel, then you are just competing in a space that's getting louder and louder, man, right? Like advertisements are becoming more and more, right? Like what's that stat? Like in the 60s, we saw like 60 advertisements per day. In the 90s, we were seeing like 80 advertisements per day. Now we're seeing 4,000 to 10,000 advertise, like per day for real, right? Like, and as AI happens and as things get vertically integrated, like, you and me are talking about Akeva and like Calendly. Like, I wouldn't be shocked if I get a Facebook advertisement in my phone for like one of those things, right? Like that's only going to get better or worse, however you see it, right? Yeah. But like this idea of like the thing that I'm thinking about is going to get offered to me is only going to continue to happen. And the people with the biggest budgets are going to win there. If you are a little guy challenger brand that's trying to like carve out your own category within that space, your own domain within that space, like leaning into this thing is a unencroachable moat, right? Like you are either building this like commodity play of like increased advertisement and lower CAC and fighting for more and more scraps, or you are building a compounding advantage, right? Like something that like gets better over time, which is this idea of more and more people knowing you, loving you, and bringing you opportunities, as opposed to you trying to figure out the next way to find your next one.
I also think that there's so much deserved hype around product-led growth, but rarely is product-led growth successful without content. There has to be some other engine going on to get people into that PLG motion.
Yeah.
And so for anyone who's building and your go-to-market plan is PLG, just like understand, like, the open AI, like chat GPT explosion, that's a hope and a prayer that that's you. And it's not a strategy. And to be honest, I would also argue, I don't know, I didn't look into them, but they probably also did a deep play into Reddit communities when they did that. So it's got to be something layered on top of that is getting people into the ecosystem in some way.
Yeah, I would say that, I would say there is no product led growth without word of mouth. And having the most unbelievable product that nobody could possibly imagine that is so freaking good that it creates word of mouth is one option, right? Like if you're that good, if you're Sam Altman, right? Like ChatGPT is just freaking better than anything we've ever seen, and it blew our minds, right? Like for everybody else, you need to create opportunities for people to interact with your product and have other people tell them, yo, man, you got to get on that or you're a sucker. Yeah. Right. So like either engineer it yourself or hope that you're just that good.
All right, Pablo, where can our listeners find you and learn more?
On the Go-to-Market album, the skit, that is my
That's
voice.
True. I didn't say that earlier. Yeah. Right. Pablo is the voice behind track number 6, I believe it is, the dry powder skit.
That's right. I'm the funding peddler.
Yes, exactly.
I'm slanging that dry powder.
All right, so we can find you on the dry. I think it's track 5. Actually, we find you on the dry powder skit on the album. Where else?
That's my number one place for the record. Beyond that, LinkedIn. Like, look me up. It's I'm Pablo Gonzalez, right? So there's a bajillion of me, but if you know Raj and you're on LinkedIn with Raj, I'm connected to Raj on LinkedIn. Happy to be your friend. I have a Category Thinkers podcast, the B2B Community Builder Show podcast, but like I would rather just make a friend. That is really what drives me. So hit me up on LinkedIn.
And for clarification, the website is bethestage.live, not bethestage.com. Correct?
Correct.
I never really ask people this, but I do want to platform you here for a moment. How can someone work with Be The Stage?
Oh, thanks, Raj. The easiest way to work with me is that if you're spending money on like trade shows and events, I think people are spending a ton of money trying to do something that everybody else is doing, right? Like whether it's like a cheap giveaway or whatever your booth is doing, creating one of these experiential content marketing experiences through a trade show, talk show booth, or like an engagement mechanism like that, I find really helps you stand out, drives word of mouth at this event, and creates this like differentiated follow-up technique of like you're following up with a gift of content and people are actually really pumped to talk to you. So if you have events in your strategy, I want to talk to you. That's probably the easiest way we're going to get in something.
Pablo, who is one person you want to give a shout out to who's been helpful for you on your journey?
I mentioned him earlier, man. It's Jerry McNamara. He's my coach. He's a guy that's been CEO for like 3 different companies in 3 different verticals and taken them from like 7 figures to 8 and 9 figures across different things. And, like having a coach that doesn't just tell you what you gotta, like how to do what you're trying to do, but helps you figure out what it is that you got to do next because he's been there before as a CEO at different scales has been huge for me. So Jerry Mack.
What are your top, I should, let me preface that.
Yeah.
Let's now give our top one or two lessons or takeaways for the listeners based on the discussion today. I'll go first, and then I'll hand it over to you. The topic today was how to make a community actually work. There's a lot that we covered. I think I don't know if it's the one thing, but at least one thing I do want people to go home with is find the adjacency between your product and the experience you can create that is not just an overt product pitch.
Yeah.
Pablo.
That's a good one. I would say it's the founding insight of, you're like, oh, that's interesting, we should talk about it on the podcast. The community is not the space that you create. The community is the interactions that you design for people to connect to each other and connect with you. And more importantly, have your super consumers interact with your prospects. So you got to figure out a way to do that. And you got to figure out a way to do that in a way that you can find that you are getting short-term results from in order to last until this thing turns into like a real community that is working for you as opposed to you working for it.
My final question, which, as you know, is how we end every episode of this show. Fill in the blank, Pablo. Entrepreneurship is blank.
You know, I answered that for the Goat to Market album, man. I wanna just do like a much more concise one for that one. It's entrepreneurship is my ability to figure out if I'm full of shit or not, man. Like, is the stuff that I say, really, does it really work for people and does it really help people? Or am I just out here like filling myself full of like, this guy talks pretty? Entrepreneurship is the ultimate test of that.
That's a very unique answer that has never been said on this show before. So I like that. All right. He is Pablo Gonzalez. Now, everybody listening, did you listen to this and you're like, ooh, I got a follow-up question to that. That sounded interesting. I want to pick his brain on this. Well, you're listening to it in a one-way podcast, so you can't ask that follow-up question. Or maybe you're at the gym listening to this and you don't have the ability to, but never fear, because we've got a way for you to follow up with Pablo directly. And that's with, the after party of this show, if you will. It's the Ask Me Anything that follows this episode. So the whole first week that this episode is live, Pablo is jumping inside of Goat to Market Club. That's our online founder and GTM leader community. And he'll be doing an Ask Me Anything off the back of this podcast. So if you've got follow-up questions on community development, if you've got follow-up questions on how to create interesting content or how to create experiential content, hell, if you've got questions about his current relationship with the Catholic Church, you can ask Pablo anything. And that happens in one place. That's inside of the Goat to Market Club. And that's going live. That's happening the whole first week. This episode is live. Joining GTM Club is free. All you have to do is just sign up, and you can sign up at startuphypeman.com/GTM-club, startuphypeman/GTM-club. We will see you inside there. Pablo, I'll see you inside there, but thank you again, my friend, for being our guest today on the GTM show.
Thanks, buddy. I'm pumped that we have developed this friendship, and I want to see you at the club for the after party, y'all. GTM Club.
That'll put a bow on this one. Before we head out of here, a couple quick housekeeping items. Number one, did you like what you heard? Well, give us a subscribe and a follow. Maybe share it with one friend who you think would find this valuable. Number two, remember that Ask Me Anything I told you about at the end of the episode? That goes down exclusively inside of Goat to Market Club, our online founder and startup community. And you can access it for free. Your membership is 100% free at startuphypeman.com/GTM-club. Number three, need pitch help? Startup Hype Man is your man. Whether it's a fundraising narrative or a go-to-market or category narrative, we've got you covered to make sure you have messaging that doesn't help you just go to market, but of course, what? Helps you become the GOAT to market. All right, we will see you next week here on the Goat to Market Show. Thank you for listening. And remember, why be a unicorn when you can be the GOAT?